The jungle was alive with strange sounds, deep growls mixed with the soft whispers of unseen creatures. Thick vines hung from giant trees, their leaves blocking most of the sunlight, making everything darker than it should have been. The air was heavy, damp, and filled with the smell of wet earth. A human walked carefully, pushing aside branches, his boots sinking into the mud. He had been warned not to come here, that this jungle was cursed and filled with things no human should see. But he had come anyway, searching for answers, maybe even for something worth saving. Every step echoed with danger. Birds with glowing eyes stared at him from the treetops. Insects the size of his hand buzzed around, their wings cutting the silence like knives. He tightened his grip on the small energy rifle strapped across his chest. He had survived wars, battles, and starvation, but here he felt something different, like he was being watched, hunted even. His heartbeat quickened, and his breath grew louder in his ears. Then he heard it. Leaves shifting, not from the wind, but from footsteps, slow, cautious, almost curious. He spun around, rifle raised, eyes scanning the thick bushes. Nothing. Only silence, deep and heavy, as if the jungle itself held its breath. He turned back, and that was when he saw her. She stood just beyond the shadows, her skin almost glowing against the green of the jungle. She was tall, slender, with strange markings painted across her arms and legs. Her eyes were large, bright, and not human, shining with a wild mix of fear and curiosity. She wore no clothes, only leaves tangled in her long dark hair, and dirt smeared across her skin like armor. She didn't look weak. She looked untamed, like the jungle itself had raised her. The human froze, unsure if she was real or some ghost of this cursed place. She tilted her head, studying him with animal-like sharpness, her lips parting slightly as if she was trying to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she crouched low, ready to run at the first wrong move. He lowered his rifle slowly, keeping his eyes on her. If he scared her, she might disappear forever into the trees, and something deep inside told him she had been alone for far too long. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small food ration, holding it out in front of him. His hand shook slightly, not from fear of her, but from the tension in the air. She narrowed her eyes, sniffed the air, and took a step closer. The jungle around them seemed to go quiet, as if every creature wanted to watch this meeting. She stopped a few feet away, her body tense, her muscles ready to spring away. The human didn't move. He simply held the food in his open hand. Then, with surprising speed, she darted forward, snatched the ration, and leapt back. She tore the packet open with her teeth and began to eat. For a moment, she looked almost childlike, her eyes wide as she tasted something new, something she had never known. But behind her, her hunger was a deeper story. He noticed scars across her arms, faded but clear. Marks of battles with predators, of survival. She had lived here, naked and unprotected, and yet she was alive. That alone was a miracle. As she ate, her eyes never left his. It was like she was measuring him, deciding if he was a friend, a threat, or prey. He spoke softly, slow words she would not understand, but his tone carried no threat. She tilted her head again, trying to mimic his sounds, her voice rough and broken. A single word escaped her, strange and trembling, but it was enough to shake him. She was not a beast. She was intelligent, lost, and abandoned. Suddenly, a low growl rumbled from the shadows. His body stiffened. Her eyes snapped to the trees, and for the first time, he saw real fear in her face. The growl grew louder, closer, until the leaves shook with movement. A predator was near. Something big, something hunting. She backed toward him, her wild confidence gone, and for the first time she seemed small and fragile. He raised his rifle again, eyes searching the darkness. A pair of glowing eyes appeared between the trees, then another, and another. The predators had circled them. His chest tightened, sweat dripping down his face. He had only a few shots left. The girl reached out suddenly, gripping his arm with both hands. Her fingers were strong but trembling, her wide eyes locked on his. She was silent, but her look said everything. She had always faced danger alone, but tonight she was trusting him. The air grew heavier. The predators shifted closer, their shapes moving like shadows ready to strike. He steadied his rifle, forcing his breath calm, his finger brushing the trigger. The alien girl pressed closer against his side, her body tense, her breath quick and shallow. In that moment, surrounded by monsters in a world that was not his, he made a choice. He would protect her, no matter what. He would not run. even if it meant dying in this cursed jungle. The leaves shook violently. One predator lunged forward, teeth flashing in the dim light. The girl gasped, her grip tightening on his arm. He fired, the blast lighting up the trees for a heartbeat. The predator fell back with a roar, but more shapes moved in the dark, restless and hungry. The human braced himself for the next attack, the alien girl's eyes wide with both fear and a strange spark of hope. The jungle was alive with danger, but now, for the first time, she was not alone. The night after the predator attack was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of the jungle breathing. The human sat close to the fire he had managed to build, his eyes scanning the darkness, always alert for movement. The alien girl sat across from him, crouched low like a wild animal, ready to spring away at any sudden danger. Her sharp eyes glowed in the firelight, reflecting both suspicion and curiosity. She had never been this close to a human before, and yet she didn't leave. Something kept her there. He took a small piece of food from his pack and placed it on the ground between them. Slowly, carefully, he pushed it closer to her with a stick. She tilted her head like a predator sniffing a trap, her nose twitching, her hands tight on the dirt. For a long time, she just stared at it, her eyes flicking from the food to his face and back again. Finally, with a sudden move, she grabbed it, pulled it back into her corner, and tasted it. Her expression changed. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked almost childlike, like she was tasting wonder for the first time. She chewed slowly, never breaking eye contact with him, as if making sure he wouldn't suddenly attack. The human tried speaking. His voice was low, steady, like one would use to calm a frightened animal. He told her his name, repeating it clearly, pointing at himself as he said it. She tilted her head again, trying to copy the sound, but what came out of her mouth was broken, rough, and strange. She frowned at the failure, but didn't give up. She tried again, her lips moving clumsily, until a sound close to his name slipped from her mouth. It was enough to make him smile, and when she saw that smile, something inside her softened. She touched her chest with one hand and made a sound of her own, a strange word from her language, perhaps her name. It was short, sharp, almost like a bird call. He repeated it awkwardly, and she laughed, or something close to a laugh, a sound mixed between amusement and confusion. It was the first time she had shown anything other than fear or suspicion, and in that moment, a small bridge formed between them. He noticed scars on her arms when the firelight touched her skin. Long, jagged marks, old and faded, but clear signs of battles she had survived. Some looked like claw wounds, others like burns. She must have been alone for years, surviving only by instinct and luck. His chest grew heavy with the thought of what she must have endured. Yet here she was, alive, strong, and still standing. To break the silence, he took a water flask from his pack, opened it, and drank. Then he placed it on the ground and pushed it toward her. She watched his every move, her eyes narrowing. Slowly, she crawled forward, picked up the flask, and sniffed it. After a moment of hesitation, she took a sip. Water dripped down her chin, and she coughed slightly, as though not used to drinking this way. But she took another sip, then clutched the flask close to her chest as if it were something precious. She stood suddenly, as if making a decision, and gestured for him to follow. She darted into the jungle, barefoot and silent. He hesitated, but then grabbed his rifle and followed her. She moved like the shadows themselves, swift and sure, knowing every tree, every path. She looked back once, her eyes glowing in the dark, making sure he was behind her. Then she led him deeper into the heart of the jungle. The air grew colder, the trees thicker. He stumbled over roots and slipped on wet leaves, but she moved with ease. Soon, they reached a small clearing where strange fruits grew on thick vines, glowing faintly under the moonlight. She plucked one and handed it to him, her face serious as if testing him. He examined it carefully, smelled it, and then took a small bite. Sweet, sharp, and unlike anything he had ever tasted. He nodded to her, showing approval. Her lips curled into the smallest of smiles before she turned and grabbed another for herself. They sat under the huge trees, sharing the glowing fruit. She showed him how to peel another type with sharp teeth, tossing the hard shell aside. He copied her, clumsy but determined. For the first time, he was the student and she was the teacher. She seemed to enjoy that, her eyes softening each time he succeeded. Then the peace broke. A sudden roar thundered through the jungle, shaking the ground under their feet. Her body went stiff instantly, every muscle ready for flight. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength and pulled him toward the shadows. They hid behind a massive tree as heavy footsteps echoed through the clearing. A huge beast, larger than anything he had seen, lumbered into view. Its skin was thick and scaly, its eyes burning yellow. It sniffed the air, claws tearing into the dirt as it searched. The human gripped his rifle tightly, his finger trembling on the trigger. But she shook her head fiercely, pressing his gun down. Her eyes told him everything. Shooting would bring more danger. She had lived here long enough to know. They stayed frozen in silence, their breaths shallow. The beast circled the clearing, sniffed once more, then vanished into the dark. Only after its growls faded did she release his arm, her body slowly relaxing. She looked at him then, her eyes filled with something new, not just curiosity or fear, but trust. For the first time, she hadn't faced the danger alone. When they returned to the fire, she didn't sit apart this time. Instead, she settled closer, just a few feet away, still watchful but no longer hiding. He gave her another piece of food, and she accepted it without hesitation. Their eyes met, and though no words were spoken, something was understood between them. In the heart of the jungle, surrounded by monsters and shadows, a fragile bond had begun to grow. The night air was heavy and damp, carrying the smell of wet leaves and soil. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers. The human sat close to the warmth, his rifle resting across his lap, his eyes half closed but still sharp, listening to the jungle breathe around them. The alien girl crouched nearby, her knees drawn close to her chest, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark like two small stars. She looked calm on the outside, but her body was tense, her ears turning at every sound, every rustle of leaves. Then it came, the sound that froze them both. A deep growl rolled through the trees, louder than before, shaking the ground beneath them. The girl stiffened instantly, her eyes wide, her breathing fast. The human grabbed his rifle and aimed into the shadows. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the snapping of branches as something massive moved toward them. From the darkness, a huge beast stepped into the clearing. Its body was covered in thick, dark fur, muscles shifting beneath its skin with every movement. Its head was massive, its mouth filled with rows of sharp teeth that gleamed in the faint light. Yellow eyes locked on them, hungry and cruel. It was larger than any predator he had ever seen, and its roar made the trees tremble. The alien girl froze in fear. Her hands shook as she pressed her back against a tree, her breath short and shallow. She had always run from creatures like this, hiding in the jungle until they gave up the chase. Fighting had never been her way. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't alone. The human raised his rifle and fired. A burst of blue light cut through the air and struck the beast in the chest. It roared in pain, staggering back, but it didn't fall. Instead, it grew angrier. It charged forward, claws ripping the ground, its roar shaking the air. The human fired again and again, each shot lighting up the night, the smell of burnt fur filling the clearing. The beast stumbled but refused to stop. Then the rifle clicked empty. His heart sank. He had only brought limited ammo, never expecting to face something this large, this relentless. The beast crouched low, preparing to leap. He stepped in front of the girl without hesitation, his body a shield between her and death. His hands shook, but his eyes stayed steady, watching the predator with calm determination. The girl clutched his arm, her fingers digging into his skin, her body trembling. She had never seen anyone stand against such a monster. To her, this was madness. No one challenged the jungle and lived. Yet here he was, refusing to move, refusing to abandon her. The beast lunged. Its massive body cut through the air like a shadow of death. At the last second, the human rolled aside, pulling the girl with him. The creature crashed into the tree, splintering wood, its roar echoing through the night. The human grabbed a broken branch and thrust it forward with all his strength, jabbing the beast's face. It roared and snapped at him, missing his head by inches. Pain ripped through his side as the beast's claws grazed him, tearing his shirt and skin. He stumbled back, blood dripping, his breath heavy. The girl's eyes widened at the sight of his blood. For the first time, she saw him not as untouchable, but fragile, yet unbroken. The beast prepared to strike again, its mouth wide open, saliva dripping from its fangs. The human grabbed a glowing fruit from the ground, one the girl had shown him earlier. He hurled it into the beast's mouth. The fruit burst open, releasing a sharp, burning liquid. The creature roared in pain, thrashing wildly, shaking its massive head. Its movements became wild and clumsy as the liquid stung its throat. The human grabbed the girl's hand. "Run!" he shouted, though she barely understood the word. But she felt his pull, his urgency, and she obeyed. Together, they ran into the jungle, their feet pounding the earth, branches whipping their faces as they fled. Behind them, the predator roared and crashed through the trees, but its voice grew weaker, the sound of its fury fading as they pushed deeper into the wild. They didn't stop until their lungs burned and their legs shook. Finally, the girl pulled him into a hidden passage between thick roots that led into a cave. The space was small, damp, and smelled of stone, but it was safe. She crouched inside, pulling him with her, her chest rising and falling quickly. He collapsed against the stone wall, his hand pressing against the bleeding wound at his side. The girl looked at him, her eyes wide and filled with something strange. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched the wound gently. Her touch was soft, hesitant, as if she was afraid he would break. He winced but did not push her away. She tore a strip of vine from the cave wall and pressed it against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her hands shook, her breath quick, but she worked carefully as if every movement mattered. For the first time in years, she was helping someone other than herself. When she looked at him again, her eyes were no longer wild with fear, but filled with something else, something close to gratitude, something she couldn't yet name. He closed his eyes, exhausted, trusting her to keep watch now. The fire of the jungle still echoed in his ears, the roar of the beast, the sound of death rushing toward them. But what stayed strongest in his memory was the girl's hand on his arm, her eyes filled with fear, and her choice to stay by his side instead of running away. The cave was dark and silent except for their breathing. For the first time since he had entered this cursed jungle, the human allowed himself to rest. The alien girl sat beside him, her hand still pressed lightly against his wound, her glowing eyes watching the entrance of the cave. She had always survived by being alone, but tonight something had changed. She had not saved herself. She had chosen to save him too. And in that choice, their bond had grown stronger than fear. The cave was cold, the walls wet with dripping water, and the air heavy with the smell of earth. The human leaned back against the stone, his side still aching from the beast's claws. The alien girl sat close to him, her glowing eyes fixed on the wound, as if watching the rise and fall of his chest gave her some strange comfort. She had pressed vines tightly against the cut, and though her hands were rough from years in the wild, her touch was careful, almost tender. As his breathing grew steady, he noticed the walls of the cave. Strange drawings covered the stone, lines, shapes, and figures scratched in with sharp rocks. He squinted, moving closer to study them. At first, they looked like nothing more than marks left by time, but then he realized they were telling a story. He raised a hand, brushing dirt away, and the pictures became clearer. There were tall figures, drawn with crowns and long robes. Around them were smaller figures, soldiers carrying weapons. And then, near the bottom of the wall, was a child drawn alone, surrounded by beasts abandoned in the jungle. His chest tightened as he slowly pieced it together. These drawings were not random. They were her story. He turned his eyes to her, and she was watching him carefully, her lips pressed tight. She pointed to one of the crowned figures, her finger trembling slightly, and then touched her own chest. Her voice cracked as she spoke one rough, sharp word. He didn't know the meaning, but the weight in her tone was clear. She had been part of something once, something bigger. A noble family, perhaps even royalty. And now she was nothing but a ghost of that past, surviving in the dirt and shadows of the jungle. His eyes went back to the drawings. He saw more pictures, the crowned figures turning their backs, the child crying, then the jungle swallowing her whole. The predators, the scars, the endless running. All of it was carved into these walls, not as art, but as memory. It was the only way she could keep her story alive. He felt a heaviness in his chest, stronger than the pain from his wound. She was not just a wild girl. She was someone left behind, someone forgotten by her own people. He wondered how long she had been here. Years? A lifetime? Her body showed the strength of survival, but her eyes carried loneliness deeper than words could describe. She moved closer to him, crouching beside the wall, her finger tracing one of the beasts carved into the stone. Then she pressed that same finger to one of the scars on her arm. She looked at him, her eyes hard, as if to say, "This is real. This is what I have endured." He nodded slowly, understanding without words. He reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of cloth. It was rough and worn, but he placed it gently around her shoulders. At first, she stiffened, confused by the gesture. But when she touched the fabric and felt its warmth, something in her face softened. For years, she had lived unclothed, the jungle her only shelter. But now, for the first time, she felt something different. Her hand clutched the cloth tightly, as if afraid it would vanish. He spoke softly, saying the word home, pointing to himself and then to her. She frowned, tilting her head, not understanding. So he tried again. He drew in the dirt with a stick, making the shape of a house, then pointed to her, then back to himself. Her glowing eyes followed his movements. Slowly, her lips parted, and she made a sound, repeating the word clumsily. It was broken, but it carried meaning. She had repeated his word. The moment was fragile, but powerful. She had never known a home, and now with him, she was learning the idea of one. But the jungle does not forgive peace for long. A sharp whistle cut through the night air, a sound not made by beasts. The human stiffened instantly, his rifle in hand. The alien girl's eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. She knew that sound. She had heard it before. It was not an animal. It was her people. Shadows moved outside the cave, voices low and harsh in a language the human couldn't understand. She pressed herself against the wall, her breathing shallow, her hands trembling. He looked at her, and in that look he saw everything: terror, shame, and a desperate plea not to be seen. She shook her head quickly, her lips whispering broken words. From what little he understood, she was saying they weren't searching for him. They were searching for her, the lost one, the girl who had been abandoned, the girl who should not exist anymore. The human's grip on his rifle tightened. He moved toward the mouth of the cave, crouching low, his body ready. But the girl grabbed his arm, shaking her head fiercely. Her eyes begged him not to fight. She had lived through this before, always hiding, always running. Confrontation meant death, but he was not her. He had fought wars, faced enemies far worse than these shadows. And now he wasn't about to leave her to be taken back by people who had once thrown her away. Outside, the voices grew closer, the shadows stretching against the cave walls. The girl pressed herself deeper into the dark, her eyes filled with terror. The human stepped forward, his heart steady, his body tense like a coiled spring. He looked back at her once, and their eyes locked. She had lived her life alone, running and hiding. But tonight was different. Tonight, someone was ready to stand between her and the darkness. The sound of footsteps drew nearer, the glow of alien torches lighting the entrance. The girl gripped the piece of cloth on her shoulders, her knuckles white, her lips whispering something like a prayer. The human raised his weapon slowly, ready to face whoever came through. The cave grew silent, the air thick with tension. The drawings on the walls seemed to watch them, the carved eyes of her past staring down as her future stood at the edge of the cave. She was no longer just the wild girl of the jungle. She was someone worth fighting for, and he was ready to fight. The night stretched on with heavy silence, broken only by the soft dripping of water inside the cave. The human sat with his rifle ready, his eyes fixed on the cave entrance, listening to every sound. Outside, the jungle seemed alive with whispers, but he knew those were not just animals. Her people were searching, moving through the trees, calling out in sharp voices that carried both authority and threat. The alien girl sat curled against the wall, clutching the piece of cloth he had wrapped around her shoulders. Her body shook as if every sound from outside struck her like a whip. Her wide eyes stared at him, desperate, begging him not to step out into danger. She was afraid of being found, afraid of being dragged back to the life she had once escaped. She had survived the jungle, but she could not face her people. The human looked at her, his jaw tightening. He had seen that look before in war, prisoners who never wanted to return to their chains, children who had run from fire only to be forced back into it. He understood her fear, and he made a choice in that moment. He would not let them take her. He lowered his weapon for a moment and moved closer to her. He placed his hand on his chest and spoke softly, pointing to himself. Then he touched the cloth she held, then pointed outside where the voices grew louder. His words were simple. With me. Safe. She didn't understand every word, but she understood his eyes, his tone, the way his hand rested on his chest with certainty. Her breathing slowed just slightly, and her trembling hands gripped the cloth tighter. Suddenly, a torchlight flashed across the cave's entrance. Shadows stretched long and sharp on the stone walls. The girl gasped and pressed herself deeper into the darkness, her hands over her mouth. The human raised his rifle again, steady, waiting. The torchlight lingered, the voices spoke quickly, then faded as the group moved past. For now, they were safe. When silence returned, he turned back to her. She still looked fragile, caught between fear and exhaustion. He knew the cave was no longer safe. They couldn't stay. He reached into his pack, pulled out a spare piece of cloth, and tore it into strips. Carefully, he wrapped one around her feet, then another around her arms. She watched him with wide eyes, confused but slowly realizing he was trying to cover her, trying to give her something she had never had, protection beyond bare survival. When he pulled off his jacket and placed it around her shoulders, her breath caught. She touched it like it was something holy, her fingers sliding across the rough fabric. Her lips moved, and she whispered a broken sound, trying to repeat the word he had taught her before. Who? The word was clumsy, but it was there. She was learning, holding onto it like it was the first piece of hope she had been given in years. He smiled faintly, then pointed outside, making a walking gesture with his fingers. He had to lead her away, closer to his ship, closer to safety. She hesitated, fear twisting her features. The jungle was all she had ever known, and the idea of leaving it terrified her. But when he stood and reached out his hand, she slowly, carefully placed hers into his. Her hand was small, rough with scars, but her grip was firm. She was choosing to trust him. They moved into the jungle, silent as shadows. The human led the way, careful with each step, his ears straining for danger. She walked close behind him, her glowing eyes darting around, alert to every sound. Once, a branch snapped far off, and she pressed against his back, clutching his shirt. He steadied her with a gentle touch, then signaled for her to move. Hours passed as they crept through the thick undergrowth. The jungle was alive with predators, but now a greater danger followed, the scouts of her people. At one point, they came across fresh tracks, boot marks pressed deep into the mud. The human knelt, studying them, his jaw tightening. They were closing in. He took her hand again and pulled her toward a narrower path, hidden by vines. As dawn began to break, a thin light spread across the jungle floor. The girl paused, staring at the horizon, where the sky glowed faintly. Her eyes reflected both awe and confusion. She had lived in the shadows for so long that light felt foreign. The human watched her face, the way her lips parted, her chest rising with slow, uncertain breaths. He realized she had never truly seen hope, never truly believed there could be something beyond the trees. He stopped walking and turned to face her. With calm hands, he pulled the jacket tighter around her and placed her hand against his chest. He spoke again, slowly, repeating the word. Safe, with me. His voice was firm, but gentle, carrying more than language. It carried promise. She stared at him, her brows furrowing as if fighting to understand. Then in a low whisper, she repeated, safe, with you. Her voice broke, but her meaning was clear. For the first time, she had given him not just her trust, but her decision. She wanted to stay with him. But even as the fragile moment held between them, danger was never far. In the distance, the sound of horns echoed through the jungle, sharp and commanding. Her people had found their trail. She flinched, gripping his arm with fear. He looked at her, his eyes hardening. There was no more time to hide. He pointed forward, toward the faint outline of cliffs that marked the jungle's edge. His ship was beyond that. Safety was beyond that. He squeezed her hand and nodded. She swallowed her fear, pulled the cloth tighter around herself, and nodded back. They moved quickly now, no longer cautious but desperate, running between trees and leaping over roots. The voices behind them grew louder, closer, chasing like the jungle itself had turned into a net to drag them back. But for every step she took beside him, her grip on his hand never loosened. In that moment, she was no longer the wild girl hiding in shadows. She was someone who had chosen a path, someone who, for the first time, believed in the promise of something better, and he was determined to make sure that promise was real. The jungle was no longer silent. Voices chased them, rough and sharp, cutting through the thick trees. Torches lit the darkness behind them, flickering like angry stars as the searchers grew closer. The human pulled the alien girl by the hand, moving as fast as he could, his boots pounding into the wet soil. She ran barefoot but did not slow. Her glowing eyes darted around, searching for paths he could not see, guiding him between twisted roots and underhanging vines. But the voices grew louder. They were not just searching now, they were hunting. The human knew they would catch up soon. His side still ached from the beast's claws, and every step sent fire through his body. But he pushed forward, forcing his legs to move. He would not let them take her. Not after everything. The girl glanced back, fear flashing in her eyes as the torches grew closer. She squeezed his hand tighter, her breath sharp and quick. For years, she had survived by hiding, by running, by staying small and unseen. But tonight, she did not run alone. For the first time, she had someone beside her, someone who refused to abandon her to the shadows. They reached a narrow pass where thick vines hung like a wall. She stopped suddenly, pulling him aside. With swift movements, she pushed the vines apart, revealing a hidden trail. He followed her inside, and the jungle swallowed them whole. For a moment, the sounds of their pursuers faded, muffled by the heavy curtain of leaves. They crouched low, breathing hard. The human leaned against a tree, pressing his hand to his wound, blood wetting the cloth. The girl's eyes widened when she saw the red seeping through. She touched his side gently, her face filled with worry. She made a broken sound, a word he didn't understand, but her meaning was clear. She didn't want him to fall. She didn't want him to leave her. He forced a small smile and shook his head, signaling that he was fine, even though pain burned in every breath. Then, in the distance, a horn blew. The sound echoed through the jungle, deep and commanding. Her body stiffened. She whispered something quickly, her voice trembling. From her tone, he understood enough. The soldiers had spread out. They were circling, closing in. There was no more time to hide. He pulled her to her feet, and they pushed onward, branches tearing at their skin. The jungle thinned at last, and ahead, the faint outline of cliffs came into view. Beyond those cliffs was the open ground where his ship waited. Safety was close, but the danger was closer. Suddenly, shadows burst from the trees ahead. Soldiers. Tall, armored, their weapons gleaming. They moved like predators, blocking the path, their torches lighting the night with harsh glow. The girl froze, her body trembling. She knew them. They were her people, the ones who had once left her to die. Their voices rose, calling her name, demanding she return. One of them stepped forward, pointing his weapon at the human, barking words that dripped with disgust. The girl pressed against the human's side, her hands clutching his arm. She shook her head violently, whispering broken words. She didn't want to go. She would rather face the jungle's beasts than be dragged back to chains. Her glowing eyes filled with desperation as she looked up at him. He saw the truth in her. If they took her, she would not survive. Not her body, not her spirit. The human raised his rifle. His arms shook with exhaustion, but his grip was steady. The soldiers laughed, their voices mocking, calling him weak, unworthy. But he didn't move. He planted his feet firmly on the ground, standing like a wall between her and them. The first soldier stepped closer, raising his weapon. Without hesitation, the human fired. The blast lit up the night, and the soldier fell back with a cry. For a heartbeat, silence filled the jungle. Then chaos erupted. The soldiers rushed forward, shouting, their weapons flashing. The human fired again, his shots precise, each one forcing them to retreat for a moment. But he was outnumbered, and his ammo was running low. The girl clung to him, her body shaking. She wanted to help, but didn't know how. Then, with sudden resolve, she grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it at one of the soldiers, striking his head. He stumbled, and she screamed in defiance, a wild, broken sound that echoed through the trees. The human's chest swelled with pride, even as danger pressed in. She was no longer hiding. She was standing beside him. But the soldiers regrouped quickly, surrounding them, their numbers pressing closer. The human knew they couldn't fight them all. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the cliffs. She hesitated, fear gripping her heart as she saw the steep drop ahead. But he didn't slow. He squeezed her hand, his eyes fierce, telling her without words that they would make it. They ran toward the edge, the ground falling away beneath them. The soldiers shouted behind, racing after them. The girl's breath came in sharp gasps, her glowing eyes locked on his face. In that moment, she didn't care about the drop, didn't care about the danger. She trusted him. They leapt. The world spun around them as they fell through the air, crashing into the thick branches below. Leaves tore at their skin, branches snapped, and finally they landed hard on the ground below. Pain shot through his body, but he pulled her up quickly, not giving her time to collapse. Above them, the soldiers' torches flickered at the cliff's edge, but none dared follow into the unknown. The girl clung to his arm, her chest heaving, her face pale with fear, but her eyes were alive with something stronger than fear. Trust. She looked at him, whispering in a broken voice, "Safe with you." The words shook as they left her lips, but they carried truth. He nodded, gripping her hand tightly. Behind them, the jungle still roared with danger. Ahead of them, the path to his ship waited. The night was far from over, but their bond had become stronger than any chain. For the first time, she was not running alone, and he was not fighting for himself. Together, they were more than prey. Together, they were unstoppable. The sky was turning pale when they finally broke free of the jungle. The thick trees gave way to open ground, and for the first time in days, the human could see the horizon. His ship waited in the distance, half hidden among rocks and tall grass. Relief rushed through his body, but he didn't relax. He knew they were still being hunted, and he could feel the weight of eyes watching from behind. The alien girl walked close to him, her hand gripping his tightly. She had never been this far from the jungle before. Her glowing eyes looked wide at the open land, at the light stretching across the sky, at the world beyond the shadows. Every step was new to her, every sight strange and overwhelming. Yet she didn't stop. She stayed close to him, trusting him more than she trusted the ground beneath her own feet. They reached the ship as the first rays of sunlight touched the land. The human keyed the entrance, and the door slid open with a low hum. The girl jumped back at the sudden movement, her eyes narrowing, her body tense like she was ready to run. But when he extended his hand again, she hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The air in the ship was different, cleaner, cooler. She sniffed it curiously, her head tilting at the strange hum of machines. He guided her through the narrow corridor to a small chamber filled with supplies. The girl's eyes darted everywhere, her fingers brushing the walls, the floor, the lights that glowed softly. She looked like a child stepping into a world of magic. The human went to a storage locker and pulled out clothes. Simple things, shirts, pants, shoes. He turned to her and held them out. At first, she didn't understand. She looked at the fabric suspiciously, then back at him. He spoke softly, showing her how to put her arms through the sleeves, how to tie the cords. She struggled clumsily, fumbling with the cloth, but little by little, she managed. When the shirt covered her shoulders, she froze, staring down at herself as if she couldn't believe it was real. Her fingers pressed against the fabric, her lips parting in wonder. For years she had lived unclothed, her only protection the dirt and the wild around her. Now she stood wrapped in something soft, something that belonged to a life beyond survival. Slowly, her lips curved into a smile. It was small, hesitant, but real. The human's chest tightened at the sight. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live. He took her into the city later that day, after making sure the ship's systems were secure. The city was alive with noise and movement. Lights flashed from every building, machines rolled through the streets, people of different species moved in every direction. The girl clung to his arm, her eyes wide and fearful. She had never seen so many people before, never heard such sounds. Her body trembled, but she didn't let go of him. He led her into a store, the kind filled with rows of clothes, shoes, and fabrics of every color. The moment she stepped inside, her breath caught. Her glowing eyes darted from rack to rack, her hands brushing against the soft cloth. She pulled at dresses, pressed her cheek against coats, touched shoes with wide-eyed curiosity. It was like watching someone who had stepped into a dream. The shopkeeper, an older woman, looked surprised at first, then smiled knowingly as the human explained simply that the girl needed clothes. The woman guided them through, handing her different pieces. At first, the girl was shy, unsure of what to do, but with gentle encouragement, she tried them on. Each time she stepped out, she looked different, less like a wild creature of the jungle, more like someone finding herself again. She twirled in a soft dress, the fabric flowing around her legs. She laughed, a true, unbroken laugh for the first time. The sound was light, awkward, almost as if she didn't know how to laugh properly. But it was real. The human couldn't stop smiling as he watched her. She had carried scars, loneliness, and fear for so long, but here she was, laughing under the lights of a store. For hours, she explored every corner, every shelf. She picked up hats and placed them crookedly on her head, giggling at her reflection. She tried on boots that were too big and clomped around like a child. She clutched soft scarves to her chest, hugging them as if they were treasures. And every time she looked at him, her eyes shone with something new: gratitude, trust, and a spark of joy. Finally, she chose a set of clothes she liked: simple pants, a shirt, and shoes that fit her perfectly. The human paid, and when they stepped outside, she walked taller, her head higher. People stared, some curious, some disapproving, but she didn't care. For the first time, she wasn't ashamed. She wasn't the wild girl of the jungle anymore. She was someone starting a new life. But as the sun began to set and the city lights glowed brighter, the human noticed something. In the distance, among the moving crowd, a figure stood still, watching. Tall, armored, eyes sharp. A soldier. One of hers. The human's hand went to his weapon, his body tensing. The alien girl noticed his sudden stillness and followed his gaze. When she saw the figure, her smile faded, her body stiffening with fear. She gripped his hand tightly, her nails digging into his skin. The soldier didn't move. He only watched, his gaze fixed on the girl. Then, slowly, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. The human's heart pounded. He knew what it meant. They hadn't given up. They hadn't forgotten. She wasn't safe yet. Not completely. Her people would come again. The girl pressed against his side, clutching his arm, her glowing eyes wide with worry. But when she looked at him, something steadied her. She whispered in a broken voice, "Safe. With you." The words were shaky, imperfect, but filled with certainty. He looked down at her, his jaw set, his hand covering hers. She was right. Whatever came, whatever shadows followed them, she would not face them alone again. And as the city lights burned around them, her journey was no longer about survival. It was about living, and he had chosen to fight for that life with her, no matter what price came with it.